The moment the little girl broke free and ran across the polished marble floor, time seemed to fracture into silence. Her tiny shoes echoed louder than thunder in the grand hall, her laughter bright and fearless, her arms stretched toward a man who had everything, except the truth that was about to shatter his world. And then in a voice so pure it cut through every whispered doubt, she called him something that froze every heartbeat in the room. Father. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unseen threads that connect lives in unexpected ways, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the most powerful truths come from the smallest voices. Ethan Clark had built his empire from nothing. The towering glass mansion he now stood in was more than a home. It was a monument to every sleepless night, every risk taken, every sacrifice made. He was known in business circles as ruthless, precise, and unshakable. Nothing surprised him anymore. Nothing caught him off guard. Or so he believed. That morning had begun like any other. Meetings scheduled, calls lined up, and his mind already racing ahead of the day. The house staff moved quietly in the background, their presence almost invisible, as if they were part of the architecture itself. Among them was Sophia, the cleaner, a woman whose existence Ethan had barely registered beyond polite nods and distant acknowledgement. Sophia had been working there for over a year. She arrived early, left late, and carried with her a quiet dignity that spoke of struggles she never shared. To Ethan, she was just another employee. But to her daughter, Lily, the world was still full of wonder. Lily had never been inside the mansion before. Sophia had no one to watch her that day, and desperation had forced her to bring the child along, hoping to keep her tucked away in a corner, unnoticed. But children are not made to stay hidden, especially not ones with eyes full of curiosity and hearts unburdened by fear. As Ethan stood near the large window reviewing documents, he barely noticed the small figure at first. It was only when he heard the quick, uneven rhythm of footsteps that he looked up. And then he saw her, a little girl with bright eyes, messy pigtails, and a smile so wide it seemed to hold an entire universe of joy. She ran straight toward him. There was no hesitation in her steps, no doubt in her expression, just certainty, pure, unwavering certainty. Before anyone could react, before Sophia could rush forward and stop her, Lily reached Ethan and threw her tiny arms around his leg. And then she looked up at him with a gaze so familiar, so piercing, it made something deep within him stir. She called him father. The word didn't just echo, it lingered, pressing against every wall of the room, forcing everyone present to confront something they didn't yet understand. The housekeeper gasped. Sophia froze, her face draining of color, and Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, uncertainty. At first he assumed it was a mistake. Children said strange things. They imagined things, but there was nothing imagined in the way Lily looked at him. Her eyes held recognition, not the kind learned from stories or pictures, but something deeper, something instinctive. Sophia rushed forward, her hands trembling as she tried to pull Lily away, apologizing repeatedly, her voice breaking under the weight of fear. She expected anger. She expected to be fired on the spot. But Ethan didn't shout. He didn't react the way everyone thought he would. Instead, he kept looking at the child, because something about her felt familiar. It wasn't just the shape of her eyes or the curve of her smile. It was something intangible, something that stirred memories he had long buried. Memories of a past he had chosen to forget, a time before success hardened him, before ambition replaced emotion. He asked Sophia a simple question. How old is she? The answer hit him like a quiet storm. The timeline didn't just align, it locked into place with unsettling precision. Years ago, before the empire, before the wealth, there had been a woman. Someone he had loved in a way that felt reckless and consuming, but life had pulled them apart. Circumstances, ambition, misunderstandings, whatever the reasons were, he had left that chapter behind without ever looking back. Or so he thought. Sophia's hand shook as she tried to explain, but words failed her. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't wanted this. The truth she had carried alone for years was never meant to surface like this, in the middle of a room filled with strangers and judgment. But Lily didn't see the tension. She didn't understand the weight of the moment. To her, this was simple. She had seen his picture once, hidden away among old belongings. She had asked questions. And the answer she had pieced together in her innocent way had led her to believe that this man was hers. Ethan's mind raced, but his heart moved slower, pulling him into something he couldn't control. He crouched down, bringing himself to Lily's level, studying her face more closely now. The resemblance wasn't undeniable, but it was there, subtle yet persistent. And then she smiled again. That smile broke something open inside him. It wasn't just about possibility anymore. It was about responsibility, about truth, about everything he had avoided confronting for years. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Tests were done. Questions were asked. Conversations that had been delayed for years finally took place, each one peeling back layers of a past that refused to stay buried. Sophia revealed everything: the relationship, the separation, the moment she discovered she was pregnant, and the fear that kept her from reaching out. She had watched Ethan rise to unimaginable success from a distance, believing she had no place in his world anymore. She chose to raise Lily alone, not out of pride, but out of survival. Ethan listened to every word, the weight of each sentence settling deeper within him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a child who had grown up without knowing the full truth of her identity. And when the results came back confirming what Lily had declared so boldly, everything changed. Ethan Clark, the man who controlled billion-dollar deals without blinking, found himself standing in unfamiliar territory. Fatherhood wasn't something he had planned. It wasn't something he had prepared for, but it was real, and it was his. He struggled. He didn't know how to connect with Lily. He didn't know how to be present in the way she needed. His world had always been structured, controlled, predictable. But children were none of those things. Lily was unpredictable. She laughed loudly, asked endless questions, and filled every room with a kind of energy Ethan had never experienced before. She didn't care about his status, his wealth, or his reputation. To her, he was just father. And slowly, something shifted. The walls he had built around himself began to crack. The routines that once defined his life started to feel empty without her presence. He found himself leaving meetings early just to spend time with her. He started noticing things he had never paid attention to before, the way she looked at the world, the way she found joy in the smallest details. Sophia watched it all unfold with cautious hope. She had never expected this outcome. She had prepared herself for rejection, for disappointment. But instead, she saw a man trying. Struggling, yes, but trying, and that mattered. The transformation wasn't instant. It was messy, imperfect, and filled with moments of doubt, but it was real. And with every passing day, Ethan grew into a version of himself he had never imagined. Not just a businessman, but a father. And in doing so, he began to understand something he had missed all his life. That success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the connections we build and the love we allow ourselves to feel. As time went on, the mansion that once felt cold and distant became something else entirely. It became a home. Laughter echoed through its halls. Toys replaced silence. And the man who once stood alone at the top of his empire now found his greatest purpose in the smallest hands that held his. Just before we reach the end, I want to ask you something special. If this story is touching your heart right now, pause for a moment and comment the word hope below. Let's fill the comments with something meaningful today. In the end, it wasn't the shocking moment in the grand hall that defined their story. It was everything that came after. The choice to face the truth, the courage to embrace change, and the love that grew from a single fearless word spoken by a child who didn't understand the impact she was about to make. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that life can change in an instant and that second chances are real, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life, and you never know who might need to hear one today. Because sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings. The truth had come like a storm, sudden and impossible to ignore, but what followed was something far more delicate. It was not thunder or chaos. It was quiet change, the kind that settles into the cracks of a life and slowly reshapes everything from within. In the weeks after the revelation, Ethan found himself living in a world that no longer obeyed his rules. For years, his life had been measured in profits, losses, and strategic wins. Now, his days were punctuated by laughter, spilled juice, bedtime stories, and questions that had no logical answers, only emotional ones. Lily did not care about board meetings or business deals. She cared about whether he would sit beside her while she colored, whether he would listen to her stories, whether he would be there when she woke up from a bad dream. And for the first time in his life, Ethan realized that being needed in this way was far more overwhelming and far more meaningful than anything he had ever experienced. At first, he tried to fit her into his existing world. He arranged for the best tutors, the most experienced caregivers, and every luxury a child could imagine. But Lily didn't respond to any of it the way he expected. She wasn't impressed by the size of her new room or the expensive toys lined neatly on shelves. What she wanted was him. Oh, it was a realization that struck him one evening when he returned home late, exhausted after a long day of negotiations. He found Lily asleep on the couch, clutching a small drawing in her hand. Sophia sat nearby, her expression soft but tired. When Ethan picked up the drawing, his chest tightened. It was a simple picture. 3 stick figures holding hands. One was labeled a mama, the other a me, and the third a papa. He hadn't been there when she drew it. That night, something shifted again, this time deeper than before. Ethan began to understand that presence could not be replaced, that love could not be delegated, and that fatherhood wasn't something you provided from a distance. It was something you lived moment by moment. From that day forward, he started making choices that once would have seemed impossible. Meetings were rescheduled, were shortened. Priorities were rewritten. And slowly, Lily began to trust that he wasn't going to disappear. Sophia watched this transformation with a mixture of relief and caution. Her life had been built around protecting Lily, around ensuring she never felt abandoned or unwanted. Crota. Letting Ethan into their world had not been easy. Even now, there were moments when fear crept in. Fear that this new reality might not last, that something could still go wrong. But Ethan's actions began to speak louder than any promise. He showed up. Again and again. He learned how to braid Lily's hair, even though his first attempts were clumsy and uneven. He sat through animated movies he didn't understand just to hear her laugh. He read bedtime stories, sometimes falling asleep mid-sentence, only to wake up and find her curled beside him. These were not grand gestures, they were small, ordinary moments. But together, they built something extraordinary. As months passed, the bond between father and daughter deepened in ways that surprised everyone, including Ethan himself. The man who once avoided emotional vulnerability now found himself embracing it fully. He laughed more, he listened more, he felt more. And in doing so, he began to heal parts of himself he didn't even know were broken. Sophia, too, found her place in this new chapter. No longer just a cleaner, no longer just someone on the edges of Ethan's world, she became part of something larger. A family that had formed not through perfect timing or careful planning, but through truth, courage, and a child's unwavering belief. There were still challenges. The outside world didn't adjust as easily. Questions arose, judgments were made. Some saw the situation as scandalous, others as unbelievable. But Ethan no longer cared about public opinion the way he once had, because for the first time he knew what truly mattered. One afternoon, nearly a year after that unforgettable moment in the grand hall, Ethan stood in the garden behind the mansion, watching Lily run freely across the grass. The sunlight danced in her hair, her laughter carried by the wind, and for a moment, everything felt complete. She turned back toward him suddenly, her eyes bright with excitement, and ran into his arms without hesitation. This time, when she called him father, there was no shock, only certainty, only love. And as he held her, Ethan realized something that no amount of wealth or success could ever teach him, that life doesn't always give you the story you planned, but sometimes it gives you the one you truly need. Now, before we close this story, I want to ask you something from the heart. If this journey touched you, if it reminded you of the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in hope, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support doesn't just grow a channel, it spreads messages that the world truly needs. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for their life to change. Just like this. And sometimes all it takes is one small voice saying one powerful word to begin.